Sign it. The pen hit the table in front of her. Or I promise you, by morning there will be nothing left in that belly to fight for. Naomi looked up at the three women standing over her, then down at the blank page, then back up. He's going to come home, she said quietly, and when he does, he'll come home to a fiancé already chosen for him, Madame Yoon cut in. Your name will simply not come up. What she didn't know was that her son was already home, and he had heard every threat made against her unborn child. Drop everything. This story is about to get very, very dangerous for the wrong people. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and turn on the bell because stories like this one don't come around twice. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. 3 days earlier, the Yoon estate was quiet in the particular way a house is quiet right before something breaks. Naomi Adaezi stood at the tall window of the east bedroom, one hand resting low on her stomach, watching her husband's convoy disappear through the front gates. 3 black cars, no plates. The kind of exit that told the world Jin Ho Yoon answered to no one. Except, apparently, he did answer to his mother. Naomi had learned that the hard way over the past year. Madame Yoon ran this house like a general ran a war room, and for 11 months, Naomi had been treated like enemy territory that simply hadn't been cleared yet. She turned from the window, 6 weeks pregnant. Nobody in that house had congratulated her, not once. Downstairs, breakfast was already a performance. Madame Yoon sat at the head of the table, spine straight, teacup lifted like a prop she'd rehearsed with for decades. Beside her sat Mrs. Cho, Jin Ho's aunt by marriage, a woman with a smile that never once reached her eyes. Naomi poured her own coffee, sat, said nothing. The nursery color scheme needs to be decided, Madame Yoon said, not looking up. Something tasteful, something that reflects this family's heritage. I was thinking soft yellow, Naomi said carefully. Madame Yoon's mouth curved just barely. Yellow, how American. Mrs. Cho laughed lightly into her teacup. Some things simply can't be taught, can they? Naomi set her cup down without a sound. She had learned over 11 months exactly how to let an insult pass through her without leaving a mark on her face. It was a skill she didn't want. She had it anyway. Somewhere on the counter near the kitchen doorway, a single blank sheet of paper sat under a glass paperweight. Naomi noticed it without understanding why. It hadn't been there yesterday. She didn't know yet what that paper was for. Blank. By the second day, the house had shifted into something colder. Staff avoided her hallway entirely. Her prenatal appointment, confirmed for Tuesday, had somehow vanished from the household calendar. When she asked the housekeeper about it, the woman wouldn't meet her eyes. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her room with her phone and a small leather notebook she kept hidden beneath a floorboard near the closet. She spoke quietly into a voice recorder. Day 2, she whispered. If anything happens to me or to this baby, everything is in this notebook. Every name, every date. I'm not being paranoid, I'm being careful. She closed the notebook, slid it back beneath the floor. Somewhere in the East Wing, Madame Yoon made a phone call that lasted 11 minutes. Her voice, for the first time in longer than anyone in that house could remember, sounded almost warm. Yes, she said into the receiver. She'll be here by Thursday. Everything is arranged on our end. Just make sure Hannah understands the timeline. She hung up. She smiled at nothing in particular. That same night, unable to sleep, Naomi went down to the kitchen for water and found Yuri, the young household translator, sitting alone at the staff table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. Can't sleep either, Naomi said, more statement than question, sitting across from her. Yuri looked up, startled. Then something in her face softened. Mrs. Yoon, I didn't expect. It's fine, Naomi said. "Can I ask you something honestly?" Yuri hesitated. "That depends on the question." "Do you know what's happening in this house right now?" Naomi asked quietly. "Something's shifting. I can feel it in every room I walk into." Yuri's hands tightened around her cup. "I only translate what I'm told to translate," she said carefully. "I don't ask questions about the rest." "That's not a no," Naomi said. Long pause. Yuri looked toward the hallway, checking, out of habit more than suspicion, that no one else was near. "Be careful this week," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I can say. Please, just be careful." She rose and left before Naomi could ask anything more. Naomi sat alone at the table for a long while afterward, the warning settling into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. By the third morning, Naomi understood something was accelerating, even if she didn't yet know what. Extra guest suites were being prepared on the second floor. Florists arrived unannounced. A staff member she barely recognized was overheard mentioning an arrival Thursday evening, though nobody would tell her who. She caught fragments in the hallway, a name, Han family, a flight number scrawled on a notepad by the front desk that someone quickly folded away when she approached. Her stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. "Someone is coming," she said to herself, standing very still in the hallway. "Someone is coming to replace me." She wanted to call Jin Ho. She pulled up his name on her phone 3 separate times that day and put the phone back down 3 separate times. He was in the middle of negotiations that could not afford distraction, he'd told her before he left. She had learned not to burden him. She had learned that lesson from 2 years of watching his shoulders carry more than any one man should carry alone. What she didn't know was that Jin Ho had already changed his flight, quietly, without telling his assistant, without telling his mother. Something in his gut had been wrong since the morning he left, a low static hum he couldn't explain, and men who survived in his world learned to trust that hum without question. Pause. Thursday arrived like a held breath finally released. By mid-afternoon, Naomi was summoned to the drawing room. Madame Yoon was already seated, Mrs. Cho beside her, and on the low table between them sat a single sheet of paper. The same blank page from the kitchen counter, now here, waiting. "Sit down," Madame Yoon said. Naomi sat. "What is this?" "An arrangement," Madame Yoon said, "that benefits everyone involved, including you if you're wise enough to see it that way." Mrs. Cho slid the paper closer, and a pen beside it. "You're going to write a letter," Madame Yoon continued, her voice even, almost pleasant, "to my son, asking for a divorce. In your own words, in your own hand. Nothing forced, nothing dramatic, simply the truth, that you've realized this life was never meant for you." Naomi's felt something cold move through her chest. This life includes his child. Madame Yoon's expression didn't change. "The child," she said, "will be cared for, generously, from a distance. That is more mercy than most women in your position receive." "I'm not writing this," Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Mrs. Cho leaned forward. "My dear, do you understand what stress does to a body carrying a child this early? What it does to blood pressure, to sleep, to everything holding that pregnancy together?" "Are you threatening me?" Naomi asked quietly. Madame Yoon's smile didn't move. "I'm informing you of biology. What you choose to do with that information is entirely your own decision." "Write it exactly how I say it," Madame Yoon said, sliding the pen an inch closer. "My dear, this baby of yours needs a mother who belongs in this family. You do not." Naomi's hand trembled over the blank page. "And if I refuse? Then we'll see how well your body handles the stress of losing what's inside you." The room went very quiet. Naomi looked at the pen. looked at the two women watching her with the patience of people who had already decided the outcome long before she'd walked in. She thought about the notebook under the floorboard. She thought about the baby. She thought about 11 months of learning exactly which battles could be survived and which ones simply had to be endured until help arrived. She picked up the pen. "Good girl," Madame Yoon murmured. "He's going to come home," Naomi said quietly, writing the first shaking line. "And when he does, he'll come home to a fiancé already chosen for him," Madame Yoon cut in almost gently. "Your name will simply not come up." Naomi's pen stopped for half a second, then continued because stopping wasn't a real option in that room, not with what had just been threatened against her child. She had no way of knowing that outside the drawing room door, standing perfectly still in the east hallway, Jin Ho Yoon had already heard every word. He had landed 2 hours early, told no one, walked through his own front door in silence, the way he moved when something in a room needed to be understood before it could be handled. He'd been on his way to find his wife when he heard his mother's voice through the drawing room door, and something in the tone stopped him cold in the hallway. He listened to the entire threat against his unborn child without moving, without breathing loudly enough to be heard. His hands at his sides had gone completely still, which anyone who had ever done business with Jin Ho Yoon would have recognized as the most dangerous version of him there was. Down the hall, a car pulled into the estate's private courtyard. A young woman stepped out, elegant, composed, dressed in soft ivory, her hair pinned with careful precision. This was Hannah Han, 26 years old, the eldest daughter of one of the country's oldest banking families, and she believed completely and without question that she was arriving to meet the family of the man she had been promised to marry. She had been told the divorce was already finalized. She had been shown documents. She had no reason to doubt any of it. "Welcome," Mrs. Cho said warmly, appearing at the courtyard entrance with her arms already open. "We're so glad you're finally here." Hannah smiled, genuinely, warmly, entirely unaware that the woman writing a forced divorce letter 1 floor above her had never signed anything, had never agreed to anything, and was, at that very moment, being threatened over the safety of her own child. Inside the drawing room, Naomi finished the final line of the letter. Her hand was shaking so badly the signature barely resembled her own name. Madame Yoon reached forward and lifted the page, examining it the way a jeweler examines a stone. "Perfect," she said softly. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Madame Yoon said, moments later, standing at the window, watching Hannah being led inside by Mrs. Cho. "Hannah will give this family exactly what it deserves." Naomi sat alone at the low table, the pen still in her hand, staring at the space where the letter had been. She didn't know a replacement had already walked through the front door. She didn't know her husband wasn't in Tokyo anymore either. He was standing in the east hallway, listening to every single word. That evening, the estate transformed into something Naomi hadn't seen since her own engagement dinner 2 years earlier. String lights along the garden path, a string quartet in the main hall, staff moving with the practiced urgency of people preparing for an announcement they'd been told mattered enormously. Naomi wasn't invited to attend. She sat alone in her room, hand resting on her stomach, listening to the muffled sound of laughter drifting up through the floorboards. She talked to the baby quietly, the way she'd started doing in the last few weeks, whenever the house became too much to hold alone. "I don't know how we get through this one," she whispered. "I promise you, whatever happens tonight, I am not giving up on you. Not ever." Downstairs, the celebration reached its center point. Madame Yoon stood at the head of the main hall, a glass of champagne raised, 60 guests gathered in careful formation around her. "Tonight," she announced, her voice carrying with practiced warmth, "we welcome a new chapter for this family, a union that honors everything my late husband built.
a partnership worthy of the Yoon name. Applause rippled through the room. Hannah stood beside an empty space where the groom should have been, radiant, composed, utterly unaware that the man she'd been promised had not yet agreed to a single word of what was happening in that hall. The divorce letter, framed and displayed on a small table near the entrance for any guest curious enough to glance at it, sat in plain view, a public trophy, proof Madame Yoon believed that the obstacle had finally been removed. "She has agreed to release my son," Madame Yoon continued, gesturing toward the letter without naming Naomi directly, gracefully, quietly, as is proper. Pause. Somewhere near the back of the hall, security tensed. A convoy nobody had announced pulled into the courtyard. 3 black cars, no plates. Nobody noticed at first. The music continued. The champagne kept flowing. Then the main doors opened. Pause. A calm voice cut through the hall. "Stop." No shouting, no hand raised, just one word, quiet enough that the room had to silence itself to hear it properly, which it did, immediately, completely. Jin-ho Yoon stood in the doorway of his own home, still in the suit he'd worn off the plane, his expression unreadable in the way that made grown men in his world go very still. Madame Yoon's face lit with relief, mistaking his arrival entirely. "Jin-ho, you're early. Come, meet—" He didn't answer her. He walked past her, past the groom's empty place at the front of the hall, past Hannah, who was already beginning to understand, in the way intelligent people sense a shift in a room before they can name it, that something had gone terribly wrong somewhere along the way. He stopped beside his wife's empty chair, turned, walked upstairs without a single word to anyone in that hall. He found Naomi exactly where he'd expected to find her, sitting in the dark, one hand on her stomach, her face streaked with the kind of crying that doesn't announce itself, the kind that happens quietly, because there's no one left to perform composure for. She looked up. "Jin-ho." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. "I heard everything," he said quietly. "The letter, the threat, all of it." Her breath caught. "You were here?" "In the hallway," he said. "I got home early. I should have walked in the moment I heard her voice. I didn't. I needed to hear exactly how far this went before I acted. That's on me. I'm sorry it cost you those minutes." She stared at him, searching his face for the lie she'd half expected to find there after everything the house had trained her to expect. She didn't find one. "Downstairs," he said, standing, holding out his hand. "There's a room full of people who need to understand what actually happened tonight." The walk down the staircase took less than a minute, but it felt to everyone watching like the longest minute of the evening. Jin-ho entered the main hall with Naomi beside him, her hand in his, her chin level, despite everything. Madame Yoon's smile faltered for the first time all night. "Jin-ho, this isn't—" He walked past her, straight to the small table near the entrance where the framed divorce letter sat on public display. He lifted it from its frame. He held both halves of what would soon become 2 separate pieces up, visible to every guest in that hall, before he did anything else. 60 witnesses, every eye on the paper in his hands. "This," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent room, "was written under threat, a threat against my child, made by my own mother, in my own house, while I stood outside that door and listened to every word." He tore the letter in half. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest thing in the room. The room froze. Hannah stepped forward, her face pale, her composure cracking for the first time since she'd arrived. "I was told the divorce was finalized," she said, her voice shaking. "I was told she agreed. I would never have come here if I'd known."
She turned to Madame Yun. "You lied to me." "I did what was necessary," Madame Yun said, though her voice had lost its usual steadiness. "Necessary," Hannah repeated. "You used me as a prize for a wedding that was never real, to cover up a threat against a pregnant woman and her child." She looked at Naomi with something that had shifted in the space of 30 seconds from confusion into genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I had no idea." One by one, the truth kept surfacing. Jin-ho turned to the household lawyer, a thin, nervous man standing near the back wall who had clearly hoped to remain invisible for the remainder of the evening. "You drafted paperwork suggesting this divorce was already legally underway," Jin-ho said. It wasn't a question. The lawyer's throat moved before he answered. "I was instructed to, sir, by your mother. I was told the filing would be backdated once the letter was signed." "Who else knew?" Jin-ho asked. The lawyer's eyes flicked toward Madame Yun, then away. Just the household staff who needed to prepare the paperwork trail. I didn't know about the threat. I swear I didn't know what was said to her in that room." Jin-ho turned to a member of the household staff standing near the kitchen doorway, a woman who had worked for the family for 6 years and gone pale the moment the letter was torn in half. "Naomi's prenatal appointment," he said quietly. "It disappeared from the calendar 3 days ago." The woman's hands trembled at her sides. "I was told to reroute it, sir. Madame Yun's direct order. I didn't ask why. I should have asked why. I'm sorry." Jin-ho listened to each confirmation without raising his voice once. That, more than anything, was what unsettled the room. A man who could have shouted and chose instead to simply let the truth accumulate, piece by piece, in front of witnesses who would carry it back out into the world. "Effective immediately," he said finally, turning to his mother. "You are removed from every position of authority in this household and in this family's business affairs, every one of them." "Jin-ho," she started. "You threatened my child," he said. His voice, for the first time that night, carried something sharper underneath its calm. "There is no version of tonight where that sentence gets softened by anything you say next." Madame Yun's spine remained straight, even now, even with 60 guests watching her world collapse in real time. "I did what I believed protected this family," she said quietly. "You nearly destroyed it," he said. The party ended shortly afterwards. Guests filed out in the particular hush of people who had witnessed something they would spend the next several weeks quietly describing to everyone they knew. Hannah left last, pausing beside Naomi at the doorway. "For what it's worth," Hannah said gently, "I hope you and your baby are all right, truly." "Thank you," Naomi said, and meant it. 3 days later, Naomi stood in the nursery, the soft yellow paint finally going up on the walls exactly the way she'd wanted it from the beginning. Jin-ho stood in the doorway watching her, the torn halves of the letter folded carefully inside a small wooden box on the shelf nearby. Kept, not burned, a reminder of what they'd survived rather than something to erase. "You didn't have to keep it," Naomi said, following his gaze. "I want to remember exactly how close we came to losing this," he said quietly. "Both of you." 2 weeks after that, Hannah sent a single message forwarded through the household office since she had no direct way to reach Naomi. It read simply, "I hope the nursery is coming along beautifully.
I meant what I said that night. If you ever need anything, you have my number now." Naomi read it twice, then showed it to Jin-ho. "People surprise you," she said. "Not everyone in that hall was working against us," he agreed. "Some of them just didn't know it yet." 6 weeks later, in a private room at the estate, Madame Yoon requested a visit. Naomi allowed it, though she didn't yet know what to call whatever remained between them. Madame Yoon sat, smaller somehow without the architecture of authority around her, and said simply, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," Naomi agreed, "not yet." "Will you, ever?" Madame Yoon asked. "I don't know," Naomi said honestly, "but I know what it looks like if you actually try to earn it. Ask me again in 6 months. Show me you mean it." Madame Yoon nodded once and left without another word. Months later, in early spring, Naomi gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Jin-ho held his daughter for the first time in the quiet of the recovery room. His hands, the same hands that had torn a forged letter in half in front of 60 witnesses, now impossibly gentle around something so small. Naomi watched him from the bed, exhausted, aching, and more herself than she had felt in over a year. "She's going to know exactly how strong her mother is," Jin-ho said quietly, not looking up from her daughter's face. "She's going to know exactly how stubborn both her parents are," Naomi said. He smiled, the real kind, the kind that reached his eyes. Outside the window, the estate stretched quiet and green in the early spring light, a house that nearly broke apart under the weight of its own secrets, now slowly, imperfectly, rebuilding itself around the family that had survived it. The torn letter stayed exactly where Jin-ho had placed it, not hidden, not erased, a small wooden box on a nursery shelf, holding proof of everything they had come through together and everything they had chosen, deliberately, to carry forward instead of leaving behind. End.